Barbuda. We started to realize the benefits of our early interventions as revenues increased significantly between 2004 and 2007, and expenditure was managed more effectively. Also, due to our success at restructuring and renegotiating a number of long-standing debts, we were able to reduce the debt-to-GDP ratio from 140% in 2004 to 110% in 2009. In 2012, the debt-to-GDP ratio will fall further to 88% of GDP. Now, some would say, why is that important? Some would say, why is that important? That is important. It's important because, as you look around the world again today, the countries that are facing their biggest challenges and problems are those countries that have unsustainable debts. Now, I thought when people used to speak of Antigua and Barbuda not paying its debt, I used to think this is something that maybe other countries do and maybe it's something that you do or you don't. Until I realized that throughout the Caribbean, Antigua and Barbuda is the only country to have defaulted on its debt, and not just defaulted consistently for years, for decades, unprecedented. And I challenge anybody, look around the world. St. Kitts recently were having a little problem, and they immediately began to renegotiate so they wouldn't default. When Jamaica was going to default, they sought assistance so that they would not default. Antigua and Barbuda is the only country. And so what you had now is the growth was taking place, but your interest payments were not being met. And if you were to take your interest payments into account, and this is a point that a lot of people don't seem to hold on to, that your interest payments, which in any properly run country is an important component of the payments that you must make. If you don't make your interest payments and you're growing and you're going along sweet as though everything is fine, I always use the example. You have a supermarket. It's well stocked. Everybody in there. The next week, one of the banks come and take over your supermarket because you have not met a fundamental part of the development process. That's what it's all about. It's not just about growth. It's about sustainable growth, because easy is the path. Easy is the path of not paying your interest. Easy is the path because it's difficult. Because when you have to pay interest and you still have to pay salaries and you still have to fix roads and do all of those things, then you realize that you have to pay for it. How are you going to pay for it? You have to find the ways to raise revenues to do that. And, Madam Speaker, that is what was not done, and that's why we had the problems. You see exactly what I'm talking about, Madam Speaker. And so, what you have, Madam Speaker, is now Antigua and Barbuda is now moving in a direction from 140% debt to GDP, which is not sustainable. We are moving towards what the ECCU has set as a target for 2020 as 60%. When you're at 60%, it means that your interest payments are going to be manageable. It means that you're not going to be choking out your other payments that are so essential for the well-being of your people. Not only that, when you borrow and you just ignore for 20 years, what you're saying is to the generation that's coming after is that you will spend and they will pay. How can that be right, Madam Speaker? That cannot be right. And that is where we're trying to put this country away from the past and firmly on the path to the future. And so, Madam Speaker, Antigua and Barbuda's policy interventions over the past few years were not unlike policies pursued by other countries as they sought to respond to what has been termed the Great Recession. Madam Speaker, the period over the last 4 years, I hear people talk about hurricanes. Madam Speaker, a hurricane, as I said, will affect you, but everybody will rush to your assistance. And you will get insurance money, and insurance will help to build back your country, pump new money in your country. I hear people talk about 9/11. 9/11 was one incident, led to a decline in tourism arrivals over a very brief period. Within 12 months, things had rebounded, everything was fine. But not only that, the world economy was doing well. What we now have is a situation where the world economy is going through the worst crisis in nearly 80 years. A lot of people they want to block that out of their minds. It is the worst crisis. Whenever else have you heard Europe in trouble, North America in trouble, Countries that had high rates of growth declining right now. That's the reality in which we live. That's why we need the steady, sturdy, and humane hand of the honourable member for St. John's Rural West. Madam Speaker, this is not a time for us to be reckless and to gamble. I have to say, Madam Speaker, that in almost every circumstances, when you look around the world, the response has been the same. They've had to strengthen their fiscal situation where it has been weak, make sure that they can pay their way, make sure they know what they're doing. They've had to manage their debt, just as we're doing. They've had to stabilize the financial sector, given many of the challenges that we all face. And they've still have had to protect the most vulnerable. This has been our approach, and this has been the approach taken by a number of progressive countries all over the world, in the Caribbean, North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. In fact, Madam Speaker, we recognized very early that we would not be able to borrow or to spend our way out of this recession. Thus, we sought the support of our development partners, including the Caribbean Development Bank, the EU, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. And as we began the process of designing and implementing our homegrown, comprehensive recovery program, Madam Speaker, we have successfully stabilized our fiscal position. We have advanced our debt management objectives, and the government will continue to emphasize strengthening capacity and institutional arrangements to secure fiscal stability. Though our standby arrangement program comes to an end in June of 2013, we are confident that through our ongoing engagement with regional and international partners, we will successfully maintain and build on the fiscal discipline that has been engendered through our fiscal and debt management strategies. The government is engaged in a comprehensive public financial management project, which is designed to significantly enhance the quality of service delivered by the public sector. The public financial management project will ensure that we cultivate and develop the necessary human resource capacity and implement policies and procedures to achieve clearly defined objectives. The focus will be on transparency and accountability in the use of public funds, compliance and oversight, and improved financial and operational management. This project will set the foundation for a fundamentally transformed and better performing public sector in which the public will have greater trust and from which the public will receive more effective and efficient service. Implementation of the Public Financial Management Action Plan commenced in the third quarter of 2010 with a $10.9 million grant from the European Union. A public financial management manager has been appointed to directly oversee the implementation of the action plan. The primary beneficiaries include the Treasury Department, Customs and Excise, the Inland Revenue Department, the Audit Department, and the Budget Office. A critical initiative in respect of revenue reform will be the establishment of a risk assessment unit and a post-clearance audit unit within the Customs Department. Once fully operational, these units will assist Customs in identifying high, medium, and low-risk importers regarding the potential loss of revenues. The department will continue to examine goods for high-risk importers prior to release by Customs. Low-risk importers, however, and most medium-risk importers will have their goods released without examination, but will be subject to audits following release of the goods, random audits. These measures will expedite the release of goods and are designed to address complaints from importers that it takes too long to clear goods from Customs. Yes. I want to take this opportunity now to recognize the hard work of the new Comptroller of Customs, Mr. Raju Badu. He came here approximately 10 years ago, and he has been working very well. And what will happen very shortly, as I indicated, is that at Customs, we'll do away with the practice of examining each container. And if you're low risk, your container goes through, but you're subject to audit. And if the audit discovers anything funny, then you become high risk, and then everything will be subject to search. Yes. It should allow for a smooth flow out of Customs. Yes. One impact of the modernization efforts within the public sector is the added convenience of payment by credit and debit cards. At the Treasury Department, the Inland Revenue Department, Customs, and the Immigration Departments. You can now pay by credit card. Previously, you had to bring either a banker's draft or cash. Now, swipe it. Antigua, moving forward.
Moving forward.
In terms of the public sector, a policy decision was taken in September 2012 to integrate the established and non-established streams of workers in the public service. The intention is to create a single, regularized, and modern public service grounded on the principle of equal pay for equal work. The government's objectives include a more manageable workplace, uniformity of procedures and rules, and equitable pay structures. The government will also move in 2013 to creating an autonomous statistical authority so that we will have an arm's-length managed statistical authority rather than a line ministry operating or controlling the statistical department. This is the trend that's taking place in the OECS, in the broader Caribbean, and some of the advanced countries. It will allow Antigua and Barbuda to have a set of statistics which we can really boast to the world that they are among the best. The small islands of the Eastern Caribbean, we're still lagging behind in terms of the quality of statistics. And let me take this opportunity also to note that many members of the business community, when they're asked about vital information, many persons do not want to disclose that information. We need to get the information so we can prepare credible statistics going forward. Madam Speaker, the issue of economic growth is one which obviously is of great concern to everybody. Now, Madam Speaker, the issue is one which many have the answers. Of course, I have seen that situation. I've seen it the day after football games, the day after cricket games. I hear people refer to them as the armchair pundits. I hear people who've never had the responsibility of a full ministry having all the answers. And those who at least have had that responsibility, I think are generally a little bit more circumspect because they have held the wheel and they know what it's like. You understand what I'm saying, member for St. Philip's North? Now, what we can say, Madam Speaker, is that we've been there.
Yes.
We've been tested. We've been tried. Yes. We've overcome.
Yes. Yes.
From days when we were having negative growth, given the impact of all these things, Antigua and Barbuda in 2012 is recording growth when the region as a whole is recording contraction. Yes. Well, if this is not a success story, Madam Speaker, what is? What is? And so, the government of Antigua and Barbuda will focus on a number of key areas in 2013 to secure economic growth going forward. These areas are, first of all, creating a business and investor-friendly environment, tourism, agriculture, and investment for growth and development. Those are the four heads I'm going to deal with now. First of all, creating a business and investor-friendly environment. Antigua and Barbuda launched its National Caribbean Growth Forum chapter in November 1990. We were the first in the English-speaking Caribbean to launch that, the Eastern Caribbean to launch that. We had wide participation from the private sector, from civil society, from youth, from the government, and from a broad range of stakeholders in the economy. The participants began the process of identifying priority actions through discussions held in three thematic working groups. Investment climate was one, logistics and connectivity was the other, and skills and productivity was the third. This brought together a lot of people. And the three leaders of those groups are all people from within the private sector who have an interest and who are patriots of this country. Over the next several weeks, the working groups will continue to fine-tune a set of policy prescriptions for enhancing growth and improving employment opportunities. The recommendations should be finalized by early January of 2013, at which point the government will convene another session of the National Caribbean Growth Forum chapter, where each working group will present the policies and actions they have identified to support growth and employment creation. The recommendations made by the various working groups will be taken on board by the government as it designs policies and programs to improve the business climate in Antigua and Barbuda. While this work is ongoing, the government has in the meantime identified some interventions to improve the climate for doing business in Antigua and Barbuda. According to the 2013 World Bank Doing Business Report, Antigua and Barbuda has retained its ranking as the second best jurisdiction amongst participating CARICOM countries. The only one not participating is Barbados. But of all the other countries, St. Lucia is number one, Antigua and Barbuda is number two. For all the criticism, but we're going to make it better. Our country's investment climate is ranked 34 points above the average ranking for Latin America and the Caribbean. 34 points above the average. The average is 97. While we surpass the regional average in 6 of the 10 areas which are measured by the Doing Business Survey, we lag in 4 areas. These are tax payments and tax rates, access to credit, business registration, and trading across borders. We have therefore secured funding from the International Finance Corporation to automate the business registration process. We are tackling that problem. This business entry reform project started in October of 2012 and focuses on improving institutional and administrative arrangements for registering business at the Intellectual Property Office in Antigua and Barbuda. The project will connect business registration with taxpayer and employer registration, thus creating a link with the Inland Revenue Department and Social Security, the Medical Benefits Board, the Board of Education. The benefit of this project will be to reduce the time, the number of procedures, and the costs associated with starting a business. So what that will mean is that once we have conquered that, and overcome that, our ranking will go even higher. The IFC is also working with the Antigua and Barbuda Investment Authority to implement a trade logistics project that will address our cross-border trading issues. Through this project, specialists in the area of customs management and port operations have been engaged to work with our Customs and Excise Division and the Antigua Port Authority to conduct a detailed assessment of their functions, not just customs, but also the port. A detailed assessment of their functions to identify bottlenecks to trade and to structure a plan for comprehensive reform. So again, we will be looking over the next 12 to 18 months, working with the IFC to implement reforms that will reduce the time required to import and to export goods, to simplify our trade procedures, to look at the required documentation, and to improve the trade clearance process. As they say, Madam Speaker, and as we all know, time is money, and that's what we're trying to compress. It takes less time, and I know a lot of the people, the members of the business community will be very pleased to know that these changes will be taking place. Businesses will save money when they have to spend less time conducting transactions at the port. While the government sought assistance from the international community to help us strengthen business registration and cross-border trading processes, we have opted to approach the payment of taxes and tax rate differently. Given that our businesses have identified these issues as impediments to their competitiveness, we have determined that they should be directly engaged established a tax policy review task force to assess the tax structure and rates in Antigua and Barbuda and to determine their impact on economic growth and competitiveness. The task force will consider how tax policy may be improved to create a more business-friendly environment that can encourage investment and improve the viability of existing businesses. This task force is chaired by Mr. Neil Coates from PricewaterhouseCoopers and includes representatives from a wide cross-section of the private sector, from the NGOs, and from public sector agencies. The inaugural meeting of the Tax Policy Review Task Force was held in December of 2012. Under the direction of its chairperson, the task force will carry out its mandate over a 9-month period, following a series of presentations to and consultations with stakeholder groups and the public. The task force will present its final report to Cabinet by September 1st, 2013. The next step will be to establish timelines for implementation of the recommendations. So, Madam Speaker, in this regard, the task force has been charged with carrying out a very wide mandate. In the first meeting which I addressed, I said to them, everything is on the table. We are going to take a complete, comprehensive review. We want to know if there is anything in the existing structure that can be modified and that can be made better. Now, this is different to simply saying you're going to abolish, you're going to reduce, you're going to change without the data, without the necessary study to make sure that whatever you do will not have an adverse impact on the most vulnerable in the society. For example, when persons say that Antiguans are paying the highest rates of personal income tax in the Caribbean, it's ridiculous. It's simply not true. If you look at what the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union has been trying to achieve since 2002, and I believe the member for St. John's Rural North East might have been sitting at that time on the Monetary Council. But he would know that in 2002, a study was carried out, and that study made certain recommendations. One of the members of the team that carried out the recommendations was Sir Alistair McIntyre, and he identified certain key areas in terms of tax measures. They did a study. It wasn't just off the top of their heads, and they said there should be 4 basic areas: property tax, a transaction tax, whether you call it VAT or ABST, an income tax, which would be tax on income, corporation income, and also on personal income. And then the other one would be a international trade tax, which is your customs duties and that sort of things. Those 4 basic areas. And that's what all the islands are pursuing. And those on the other side participating in that discussion in 2002. But when you look at where Antigua and Barbuda is, in relation to the goals that were set, the mandate at the time was that in each island, given out the nature of our economies, we should try to achieve a tax-to-GDP rate of approximately 25%. Now, some countries are close, other countries are closer. But let's see where Antigua ranks in terms of tax-to-GDP when people say that we pay more tax in Antigua than anybody else. In Anguilla, the tax-to-GDP ratio is 22%. Antigua and Barbuda, 18.1%. Dominica, 24.2%. Grenada, 19.1%. Montserrat, 23.3%. St. Kitts and Nevis, 20.3%. St. Lucia, 23.4%. And St. Vincent and the Grenadines, 22.1%. Antigua has the lowest tax-to-GDP ratio in the Eastern Caribbean. Now, of course, as I said, there will always be those who they will know more than the governor, no more than the deputy governor, no more than all the technicians in the central bank, no more than everybody. They will always know. So, Madam Speaker, I think history has recorded a sacred place for those persons, and it is usually found behind the door of the kitchen, called a dustbin. Now, I also want to point out that in terms of our property tax that we introduced in 2007 a market valuation basis for property tax. Previously, what you had was a property tax valuation based on replacement value. So if you had a house worth $100,000 in Gray's Green Bay, you would pay the same tax as somebody who had the same price house in Crosby's or over Jumbie Bay. We changed it to market value, which takes into account the location, and that has been a tremendous benefit for the ordinary poor people of Antigua and Barbuda. Another thing that we did in terms of tax reform in our period of 2004 to 2009, is that I remember when I was a lawyer, you used to have persons who want to transfer land from father to son or mother to daughter